Hi everyone, welcome to my review of Steven Spielberg's Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom in 1984. So yes, once again back with this set to review it. The next in this series, 1984. Now, of course, Indiana Jones. If you've seen my Raiders of the Lost Ark review, you know that is in my top 15 of all time, hands down. I said that was the best action film ever made, and of course, very very loved film that one. This film. A bit of a different story, very, very controversial film. And yes, of course, it did receive a lot of negative reviews, and, many, many people do hate this film, actually, actually hate it, but definitely, and I agree, it is the worst in the trilogy. Most people would say that. Some people don't like Last Crusade as well, but Raiders, is usually one that people surely can't deny is a good film, and, a great film for me, definitely one of the very, very best, of course. That film is the greatest action film ever made for me, and this film, really gets a lot of hate. As I say, it's very, very, a lot of critics did hate the film. Roger Ebert actually would give it a 4 out of 4. So yes, there are some who do think it's a great film, and Spielberg himself, of course, has said it's a film he doesn't really hold in high regard. He didn't think it was, it didn't turn out the way he wanted it to and stuff. Of course, it's the first film really that introduced the PG-13 rating, and that's one of the criticisms. Weirdly for me, that it's too dark and stuff. But of course, this is my review of the film. And I have said, maybe hinted at in past reviews and stuff. That I do think this is great. And yes. I love this film. So controversial review inbound, as well as a spoilers alert for anyone who has not seen the film and wants to watch it, of course, and then maybe come back to the review. But most people have seen this trilogy. So yes, I will say it's the worst in the trilogy, but for me, an absolutely stunning film, and I adore this film. Truly, and there's just really, I don't think there's the criticisms that people have given of the film. That's fine, you're entitled to your opinions. But yes, I don't really agree with them. I do think this is a great, great film, and actually for me, here's the controversial part. I do think it's a masterpiece, an underrated masterpiece. Although I can certainly understand how some people be annoyed at this because the big, big step down from for me, the greatest action film ever made, which is Raiders. This isn't, it's not even in the top, 10 or 15 really. But wow, this film is definitely in my top 200 films of all time. I do think it is a masterpiece. Not that every single film that's in, on my list of favourites is a masterpiece. There's a couple that are not quite even great, but most of them are ones that I think are great. And this one is no exception. I do think, this is one of my favourite Spielbergs, although not top 5 or anything, but really is one of my favourites. Another masterpiece, in my opinion, that he's made. And I think I can understand, as I say, how there's criticism to the film. Some of the stuff I don't quite get criticism for. But yeah, and of course, step down, and within the trilogy, it's not as good. It's nowhere near the levels, cinematically, in terms of writing. The world building and stuff of Raiders and Last Crusade, overall the acting and stuff, the characters, compared to them films, is nowhere near as good. The mythic qualities, and overall just the overall, kind of consistency of the film. It's just not on them levels that them two films reach, especially Raiders. On its own, this film for me is a masterpiece of action adventure. And just romance is why I absolutely love this film. Of course, one of the big things, we'll quickly say, Willie Scott, played by Kate Capshaw. She's criticised a lot, and she's one of the things, particularly her, what they were doing with the character, is one of the imperfections I have for this film. I don't think, it's quite a perfect film, but I will give it full marks. That's a kind of spoiler there. But I do think, some films that are masterpieces, you can have some room for some, slight imperfections. I count this as one of them, really, and maybe just another one or two, parts throughout the film early on, really, that just doesn't quite, is a bit kind of cheap, maybe. But yeah, I think actually this film is just stunning from start to finish. And a great, great opening once again. This time, of course, it is a prequel, set in 1935, and yeah, you've also got Jonathan Key Khan, who plays Short Round. He's in it from pretty much the start of the film as well. And yeah, these three characters, Indy as well, going on this adventure. They go from old Shanghai eventually, of course, ending up in India, and this palace, of course, in search of, these Sankara stones, and yeah, basically trying to rescue these children as well, which is, of course, exposed in the film, that these children have been taken, and of course you learn that they are slaves, in these tunnels and stuff, in these mines, and yes, this is it. This is the main drive of the film, and yeah, of course, it opens up, in this nightclub, if you will, and yes, very, very, the tone is set. This is the most campy, of the trilogy, definitely. So, this is, of course, I don't, of course, anyone can watch kind of child-based films, kind of centered towards more kids. Anyone can, but I will point out it is made more, kind of dialed down in that sense. In many ways, it is more, kind of targeted towards, kids. If you want that, it definitely is. But for me, that's irrelevant, really. That doesn't mean anything. As I say, it's kind of just offensive and stuff to say this should be. I don't really agree with age ratings too much either. But yes, this film, of course, it is more in that vein. Despite, of course, having more, definitely actually for me the most brutal stuff in the franchise. This is brutal. This film. Hence the kind of backlash and stuff, the PG-13 kind of thing. There's ripping out hearts. There's people getting put into fire pits. People getting eaten by crocodiles. But yes, from the outset, we're knowing that this is kind of a lot more campy. It opens with a kind of song and dance. Anything goes. I do love that scene personally. I know I can understand how people would be a bit annoyed going from, of course, one of the greatest openings of all time of Raiders, and the bolder scene, of course. Indiana Jones getting introduced, going from that to this, with someone singing and looking right at the camera. I can understand that. But personally, I love the scene. It's a great, upbeat scene. I love it. And yes, I love this whole kind of 16 minutes or so opening act or opening kind of sequence. The opening act's really the first 40 minutes. Yes. And basically, of course, you've got these gunfights and everything. The way they escape from that nightclub is absolutely masterful, in my opinion. This is the thing. In the sense of action and adventure, this film is pretty much perfect. I don't have a single flaw with the action in the film. This is top notch, top of the class. This is stunning action. Production across the board is absolutely breathtaking, in my opinion. The sets, of course, all the props, and just the way these, the scenes in the temple underneath, of course. This is stuff of legends. Leading up to that, wow, that mine cart chase kind of sequence is one of the greatest pieces of action in cinema for me, full stop. That's my personal view. That's it. Wow. And of course, yes, you introduced to Willie Scott, who, everyone, complains about her screaming and stuff, throughout the film. I get it, I can understand that, how she can be perceived as an annoying character. There's only really one or two parts early on, actually, that I would actually, say is flawed. That's why I say it's a bit of an imperfect film, but not one that deserves, something like this. It does not derail the film at all. It is a masterpiece for me, but she does, she's kind of, her character's made to kind of be this, whining character, someone who screams at everything, really. And there's a couple moments early on, and maybe one line in particular, in the plane and stuff, when they're on about jumping out and stuff. That line there, it's not great, and it's quite a bit too far, But then, really, once they, land and stuff, and they are in India, then on, I think mostly, she's actually a really good character. She's known pretty much all the time to be one of the worst characters in cinema. Short Round as well. I think we'll talk about Short Round. I think he's a great character. I don't care. I think he's great. The actor, of course, Jonathan Key Khan, was also in The Goonies. He's amazing in that. Another amazing film that I love. I'll be reviewing that soon, of course. I did rewatch it recently. But yes, he's great in this film. I think he's just so enjoyable. The relationship between him, the kind of father and son relationship between him and Indiana Jones, of course, is just great for me. The kind of progression to the film as well. The kind of emotional undercurrent with his story, how he was kind of left on the streets, and Indiana Jones, of course. Indy took him in, and he's, of course, along for the ride, on his adventures, and just great character for me. I really loved him in the film, and eventually Willie Scott becomes a character I really loved, actually. I do really love this romance. It does kick in around the 40-minute mark, especially. when they're in the hotel rooms, and stuff, and yeah, the suites. There's great comedy in my opinion in these scenes. And it's something I rooted for. I did actually grow, after that 20-minute mark really to love this character. And I do think, it's a great trio of characters. I think it's obviously a very controversial review, but it is my personal review. I do think it's a great trio. It works. The dynamics work so well, and I really cared and stuff when they got captured throughout the film, and I did want them to, of course, get out of this place, and as well, of course, the way they kind of include the slave children, rescue them. I think this is so satisfying when they all return, of course, at the end to their parents. This is great stuff. It's so human, kind of magic touches that Spielberg does, in his films, and this is very pleasing. That's an understatement, of course. The ending is one of my, favourite kind of final acts in a film, and I love the actual final shot personally. It's kind of a bit of a corny film, of course, but I do love corny films. As you know, if you know my channel, I do, love this when it's done well, and in my opinion, this is done well. This is not modern kind of cringy kind of stuff that can be done. This is something that really fits the tone of the film, in my opinion, and I love all the endings to these films, Indiana Jones films. Not Crystal Skull necessarily, but we'll get to that. I don't hate that film or anything, but we'll get to that. Last Crusade is my personal pick for the best ending, the actual shot and everything. But this is a great one. I really cared about all these characters, and of course just all the children as well. The way I wanted them to get back to their parents. It's a great combination of kind of elements here that Spielberg balances out perfectly, in my opinion. And I do think, it's still got the kind of the storytelling, the great storytelling, that is present in this whole trilogy. It's a step down, in Raiders as well, compared to it. We'll compare it. The actual mystery to the film, the storytelling in Raiders is literally the Godfather level, in my opinion. The way that every single scene, every line of dialogue, every shot, of exposition and stuff, builds so well. You are enthralled by this. And it's something that you cannot kind of take your eyes off. This is something that is, so believable. It's a fantasy film that's fully immersive in every way. Every single scene in that film, every line, masterfully builds to the next. And of course, that is one of the greatest narratives of all time. Compared to that, it's a step down. Since I can't really criticize this film on its own, I'll compare it. It's a step down in that, and it's not got that absolutely perfect blend of action. Some of the very best action, for me, the best action really. In terms of that kind of action in Raiders of all time. Compared to that, it's not on that level. It's not got the same feel, the aura, the mystical kind of feel that Raiders has. The cinematography is a step down when compared, but wow, in its own right, I got so invested. The exposition to the film is great. It's great visual storytelling, masterful. You've got wonderful shots, once again, of Indian stuff. The way they're portraying, the land and everything is just beautiful to look at. And when you get into the temple, this is when it actually improves. The cinematography is wowing. The use of red in the film is absolutely wonderful. Of course, hellish. Now this film, of course, it's very dark, especially when you get to them scenes. Of course, you've got the bald villain, and very iconic, of course. I think he's been criticised as well. The villain, in the first film, the villains were great. And of course, they were actual, characters who were multi-layered. Especially the main villain of the film, and this villain in this film, in the Temple of Doom, is not someone to really be taken seriously in that sense. He's very campy, very kind of over the top, as I say. But I really loved the performance. It's actually one I really enjoy. Amrish Puri is such a great, a great over the top performance, in my opinion. It's so enjoyable, and one who is completely insane, but very funny as well. And I just think, it kind of adds to the experience. This is really kind of like a fever dream, in these sequences. The use of res, as I say, the editing as well, just the whole kind of soundtrack, and what they're doing here, the chanting, and all this kind of, voodoo stuff. It's really atmospheric. I think, it's just great stuff. Kind of horror elements in there, and it adds to kind of a very bizarre, but for me, so masterfully achieved kind of, hellish feel, that this kind of centerpiece has. And yeah, I think just as a fantasy film, once again, this one really, really excels. And just the sets in this, are absolutely masterful in my opinion. This is something, once again, delivering some of the best sets of all time for me personally. It's very, very rare for an action film to even achieve the level of this one in terms of that. The other two are even better, of course, but this one is stunning. It really is, and of course, the minecart chases at the end. That is stuff of legends. That is a sustained, massive, epic sequence that just never lets up. Of course, you've got character moments within this, and things that where there's so many tense moments on the edge of your seat. At least I was, and moments where you think these characters are going to, of course, fall. And in this film, actually, once again, it's a film that does, of course, allow our hero to kind of get, take hits at stuff. He does, is vulnerable in the film, and of course, he does get, of course, kind of possessed, if you will, at points in the film, which is, of course, something that changes things up. And then, of course, you've got Short Round, that kind of relationship there, really, really emotional actually in them parts. When he wants Indy to come back and stuff, and then when he does, of course, it's so satisfying. And then they, of course, escape along with, of course, all the children they rescue, and just so satisfying, that final act. This is just, it tops itself, keeps topping itself with the action in this film. This is absolutely stunning. The way this is designed is genius in my opinion, and just cinematically, and the use of music and stuff. John Williams, once again, a mind-blowing score. Very different from Raiders, but wow, this is absolutely brilliant. And of course, yes, the way the music is used is just absolutely stunning. Epic conclusion, of course, the film. And yeah, this film, as I say, I do love it. I think I really love everything about the film. Yes, there's some imperfections, and it doesn't, it's not got, villains and maybe some side characters who are, some of the best or anything for me, but wow, in its own right, I think very, very little to flaw for me, and the very, very slight imperfections that I have, just mainly with, sort of Kate Capshaw's character, Willie Scott, very, very early on, maybe one or two instances, that is not enough for me to kind of derail, for me to derail the score. And, of course, many have said that just ruins the film. Fair enough if you can't put up with the kind of screaming and stuff, but for me personally, it doesn't really affect my experience, as I do love the character eventually, and quite quickly actually. And yeah, I think I have pointed out, some of the slight imperfections, but for me, it does get full marks. We'll get to that rating very soon, but wow, this is just a stunning film. I love the characters, of course. The story, it's not anywhere near as engrossing or committing, in terms of storytelling, as Raiders, as Last Crusade. But wow, I was so invested in this film once again. This is a film that I've seen many, many times. I saw it over and over as a kid. It could be my most watched film, of the franchise, although close to Raiders in terms of how many times I've watched it. I have watched this more than Last Crusade, and of course, Crystal Skull I've only seen about, kind of 2 or 3 times all the way through. But yeah, this film is so, kind of a film that I used to watch all the time, and I've seen it so many times in total. It's such an enjoyable film. This is one of the most enjoyable action films ever made, in my opinion. But the difference is here, it's not just an enjoyable kind of campy film. For me, this is masterfully done, and actually, slight imperfections, but I do absolutely adore the film, and it is well into my top 200. I actually love the kind of practicality of this film, the traditional kind of methods here. It's just so good. The visceral feel, of the action overall, it's something else. You feel every punch, of course. It's just the creativity that goes into this. All these, even these what you could call just basic fight scenes, are just elevated by the way Spielberg, directs, of course, edits it. The editing is top notch. But the use of the environment in the film, all the different creative ways, and just the ways that Indiana Jones, of course, and others, involved, they've basically defeating these enemies. It's just something else. It's so involving, so thrilling, just from start to finish. This is one roller coaster ride, of course, and just wow. It just feels like you're in the film, at least to me, and very, very, compared to say, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which was weirdly, very very heavily, use of CGI in that, and just stuff that didn't quite feel like you were there. Of course, Spielberg has admitted that. Of course, and I think the fridge scene and everything like that. We'll get to that on that review, which doesn't bother me, as much as some people say. That's the least of my problems with the film, that one. But yeah, it just doesn't overall feel. If you compare that to even this one, it doesn't feel as real. It doesn't feel as kind of visceral and kind of grounded. Within the action. The practicality of this film is just something to truly praise. All these sets, it's something else. And the use of comedy, in these very, very tense scenes, where there's people about to get, squashed and all this kind of stuff, or fall off cliffs. The comedy is just still there. He's not afraid to inject this, into the film. But the way this film feels once again so visceral, and just so thrilling. This action, there's something else, and combine that with the use of music and all the whole sound design. It's just off the charts. So overall, of course, yes, I do love this film to bits. I do think it's an absolute masterpiece. That's my opinion. It's not one of the 100 best films or something like that, or even my top 100 favourites. But it is actually in my top 160 or so. And yes, for me, it does get full marks. It gets 100. But you know what? As I say, if something gets 100, definitely a strong kind of masterpiece for me. One without. Not every film that gets 100 I think is absolutely perfect. Everything in my top 100 certainly is, but some of them, outside of that, maybe, maybe ones that I don't think quite are perfect, but it doesn't have to be, to get the full marks. And of course, when you get into certain, kind of brackets, on my favourites list, I do give the plus tiers. That's a combination, of course, of quality and preference. And yes, for me, personally, I do give this film 100% plus. Tier 2, maybe a shock, but it's my opinion. And yes, this is a great, great film, a masterpiece of action and adventure. The spirit of this film, the energy, once again, Spielberg, I think, masterfully directs the film, and it's a shame that it didn't go well, for him in terms of the critical, acclaim and stuff, and it got a lot of hate for this one, and of course, he actually, considers this, I think, the worst of the franchise, and I can understand how he didn't. Maybe he's not got great memories of some, the kind of backlash and stuff of this. But, I think he really deserves the praise for this one, because for me it is a masterpiece. I do think there's so much in this film that is just so enjoyable, so entertaining. Just as an action film, this is so good. This is just another masterpiece. I think clearly, I think the trilogy, all of them are masterpieces, in my opinion. This is the worst of the trilogy, as I've said. But I don't compare it, in many ways. I do think this is the one that has slight imperfections, unlike the other two for me. But it's so good. I think the characters, as I say, Willie Scott, after just a mere 20 minutes, really, I love this character. I think there's some really, really great comedy, between her and Indy, of course. Harrison Ford in this film as well. He's on fire. He doesn't dip, in these films, in the quality of his performance. He is just great in this film. It's not. The difference is he's not given, as compelling or, masterfully constructed characters in this film, or, the chemistry between him and Kate Capshaw is not as strong, as of course Karen Allen, for example, in Raiders, and of course, yes, compared, he's not as good in this film, but really not far. In terms of his performance, he does not dip, as I say, in this trilogy too much. He's great in all of them. He's just legendary, of course, in the film. Such a likable, hero. He's so great. Becomes maybe even more vulnerable in this film at times. With of course the possession and stuff, and the way, of course, he nearly gets his heart ripped out. And stuff. And I love the villain in the film. Just very, very enjoyable. So enjoyable. Not, a complex character, the villain. None of the kind of villains in the film, that are meant to be. They are very, maybe people could say they're one note, but, not necessarily. Doesn't need to, kind of derail a film. Doesn't need to be a flaw. I don't really consider it that. For Guardians of the Galaxy doesn't have one of the best villains of all time, but it's not really needed. It's not about that. For example, this is the same. I think it's more about the kind of, in terms of that, it's more about them rescuing the children, and yeah, just it is very, very campy, this film. I can understand how people, be a bit annoyed at this film, especially, within this trilogy. It's such a, Raiders set the the bar so high. I think it's pretty close to being the greatest film ever made. That one, but this film in its own right, I do think it's a masterpiece. And yeah, it's just my opinion. I've seen many reviews where people give certain films that hated high scores, and this is one of them. This is just one of them reviews. And I, of course, I understand. I welcome people saying that they don't like the film and stuff. But yes, of course, once again, be respectful in the comments. Everyone has different opinions, and it's great, of course, to compare different films, within trilogies and stuff, and kind of say what you don't like about them, say what you like. I personally love everything about this film. Slight imperfections. Maybe Kate Capshaw's character is a bit over the top, especially in his first 20 minutes, and it's just one that kind of some of these screams and stuff are not quite warranted in that way, but the rest of the film, there's all the instances she does scream are kind of warranted, and just she becomes a really great character in my opinion. I thoroughly enjoy this romance. This is a fantastical film, a romantic film, just a film full of charm and energy. It's very, very dark and daring. Of course, some people consider it to go too far in cases, but I don't really. The heart stuff and all that, it's brutal. It's insane. It's off the walls, but I love it, and I love the kind of the eating scene as well. In the temple. That's just hilarious stuff, and it's just this is a film that's so full of atmosphere, very bizarre atmosphere at times, but it's one for me that works. I don't think the kind of clash of different, the darkness and light in the film breaks the actual tone. I do think it's consistent in that sense, and yeah, it's a film that for me is just so. It's directed with such ease and kind of edited to a point where the film has such a wonderful flow, and just as I say, the action scenes in the film are so masterfully put together. The action is flawless in my eyes. Absolutely flawless action in this film. It's a perfect adventure film, in many areas, and of course, it is more contained. It's not as much ground covered. It's not as big a scope, and it's not as ambitious, of course, or as executed as perfectly as Raiders, of course, and Last Crusade. In my opinion, I can't wait to review that one. But it is in its own right among my favourite action films, and just so satisfying. This film, of course, the ending. Again, it's not a complex film in many areas, but I do think it has a lot of humanity and emotion to the film in parts. I do think it has, somewhat of a complexity in some of the characters and stuff, and I love, the kind of the undercurrent it has with the short round and Indiana Jones in the film, and all the kind of the children getting brought back, of course, to their parents. It's dark, it's daring. Some don't like it, but I do think it works wonderfully, and just to a climax that is, wow, it's mind blowing action, constantly topping itself. The minecart chase, as I say, legendary. Some of the greatest action I've ever seen, leading to the bridge scene, which is absolutely brilliant. Just absolutely stunning action. It's very violent, this film, but that's not a flaw for me personally. And yes, it's in my top 160, 150 films. My Spielberg ranking will be extremely controversial, and of course, I welcome people to give their rankings on that. But of course, as always, be respectful. Of that, because this will be extremely high, and I don't want that to turn into kind of aggressive comment section, which you could easily do. The Spielberg ranking, I will say, will be controversial, because this film will be higher than certain films that are loved. But I personally love this film. It means a lot to me. It's a wonderful film about action adventure, so masterfully constructed, with a couple of imperfections. As I say, I do admit to that, and personally feel a couple of imperfections, but not ones that bring this film down in terms of the rating. And it's definitely one of my favourite films of all time. Not on the level of Raiders and Last Crusade, but miles better than Crystal Skull. That's far and away the worst. Can't wait for the fifth one, of course, coming out. Only 2 years now we have to wait, so yeah, it keeps getting delayed. Maybe that's a good sign. Maybe they're thinking it through even more, which should be great. Cannot wait to see that. But yes, Temple of Doom for me is a masterpiece, and I do love this film. So yes, tell me your thoughts in the comments, and how you would rank the trilogy, how you rank the franchise, and yes, thanks for watching my review.